Carl Jung's most unnerving psychological discovery wasn't about how to control anger. It was about the rare individuals who never seemed to feel it at all. These weren't people suppressing rage or pretending to be calm. No, they had undergone a profound inner transformation that made them nearly immune to emotional disturbance. Jung found this so unusual and so powerful that he labeled it emotional impermeability. Imagine this. Someone insults you, mocks your work, betrays your trust. What do? Most people react with anger, hurt, defensiveness, but not the emotionally impermeable. According to Jung, they simply don't react. Not because they're numb, not because they don't care, but because they have developed a level of inner awareness that makes external negativity irrelevant to their sense of self. Jung encountered such individuals during his clinical work, and one patient in particular stood out. A highly successful businessman referred to here as Heinrich came to Jung in 1919, not because he felt something was wrong, but because those around him did. His wife was disturbed by how utterly unbothered he seemed in situations where others would explode. She told Jung, "My husband doesn't get upset about anything. I confessed I've been having an affair for 6 months. All he asked was if I was happy if I needed anything from him, and whether I wanted to continue the marriage or not." To any outsider, that might sound like emotional shutdown. But Jung discovered that Heinrich wasn't emotionally detached. He was radically self-aware. He had trained himself to see every emotional trigger as a mirror, a reflection of something inside himself. Jung called this the shadow mirror effect. In other words, when someone triggers you, they aren't necessarily attacking you. They're showing you something unresolved in yourself. That rude coworker who constantly cuts you off. Maybe they reflect your fear of being ignored. That friend who always shows up late. They could be highlighting your need for control. That critical relative, a mirror to your own self-doubt. Heinrich didn't arrive at this mindset easily. It began with a painful betrayal. His closest business partner stole his biggest client and nearly ruined him. But instead of reacting with fury, Heinrich asked a radical question. What part of me is this person reflecting back at me? What he uncovered was powerful. His partner's greed mirrored Heinrich's deep-seated fear of financial instability. The dishonesty pointed to his own habit of withholding emotions. The betrayal itself exposed his hidden capacity for self-interest. By taking responsibility for these shadow traits, he stopped seeing the world as full of enemies and began viewing others as unconscious messengers. Jung called this transformation psychological immunity, a mental state where others' behaviors are no longer seen as threats, but as insights. Jung believed that Heinrich's transformation wasn't the result of intellectual insight alone. It was a deep psychological shift, one that could be learned, replicated, and practiced. At the heart of this shift was a protocol. Jung began to refine something he called shadow integration. It teaches that every trigger is a guide. Every difficult emotion is a doorway to deeper understanding of oneself. Heinrich didn't view betrayal, criticism, or disrespect as personal affronts. He saw them as symbols, each one holding a lesson about a part of himself he hadn't fully confronted. The colleague who disrespected him wasn't just being rude, he was highlighting Heinrich's discomfort with vulnerability. The rival who outmaneuvered him wasn't just deceptive. He was showing Heinrich his own fear of being seen as weak or foolish. This ability to interpret triggers not as threats, but as teachers is what made Heinrich seemingly untouchable. Jung formalized this insight into what became known as the shadow integration protocol. And it involved asking 3 transformational questions whenever triggered. What trait in this person am I judging most harshly? Where do I exhibit this same trait even in small or hidden ways? What is this trigger trying to teach me about myself? It wasn't about blaming yourself for others' actions. It was about using the emotional response as a magnifying glass, focusing it inward instead of outward. This inward focus didn't make people passive, it made them powerful. Because instead of being yanked around by external drama, they began to use every negative experience as fuel for growth. To see how this looks in real life, consider the example of Sarah, a mid-level marketing manager. She felt increasingly irritated during meetings, where her coworker Tom constantly interrupted her. At first, she saw it as plain rudeness. But using Jung's method, she reflected, "What am I judging in Tom? His constant need to be heard. Where do I show that same trait?" She realized that during moments of insecurity, she often spoke over others too, trying to prove her worth. What was this teaching her? That her anger toward Tom was a projection of her own discomfort with being overlooked. Once she saw that something incredible happened, Tom's interruptions no longer triggered her. She understood them for what they were, his insecurities, not her inadequacies. She responded with calm, redirected the conversation gracefully, and even began to support Tom when she sensed he felt anxious. She had moved from reaction to reflection, from anger to understanding. This is the true power of the shadow mirror. It doesn't just help you manage emotions, it rewires how you experience them. You start to see others' behavior as a language, a set of unconscious messages about their own pain, their own patterns. And if you're willing, the parts of yourself that still need healing. Heinrich didn't just survive betrayal, he transformed because of it. And anyone who learns to apply this method consistently can begin that same transformation. As Jung often reminded his students, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. But Jung's exploration into emotional impermeability didn't stop with shadow integration. He discovered another powerful mechanism that these rare individuals possessed access to what he called the reaction gap. This concept was both simple and revolutionary. It describes the moment of conscious choice between stimulus and response. Most people live in a loop where something happens and they instantly react. Insult, anger, betrayal, outrage, criticism, defensiveness. But those who developed psychological immunity had created a pause, a mental buffer that allowed them to decide how to respond rather than being swept away by reflexive emotion. Heinrich described this experience to Jung with poetic clarity. "When someone insults me, it's as if time slows down. I can see their words approaching like arrows. But instead of striking me, they hang in the air. In that moment, I choose, do I pick up the arrow and stab myself with it? Or do I let it fall?" This was more than mental discipline. It was a fundamental restructuring of how the mind processes emotion. Jung recognized it as an advanced form of conscious awareness, where emotional triggers no longer hijack behavior. He named this internal space the reaction gap, and believed that accessing it could shift someone from being emotionally reactive to emotionally sovereign. The technique Jung crafted to train people into this state was called the observer protocol. It works in 3 deliberate steps: pause and breathe when triggered. This interrupts the automatic pattern. Observe as if you're watching a movie. Pay attention to the words, the tone, the body language of the other person. But most importantly, watch your own internal reaction without judgment. Choose your response not based on habit or hurt, but on your values, your goals, your principles. Let's see this in action through another case, Maria. A teacher constantly criticized by her school principal. In the past, she would leave meetings feeling anxious, attacked, and helpless. But after learning the observer protocol, everything changed. When the principal criticized her curriculum in front of colleagues, Maria didn't shrink or argue. She paused, took a slow breath, and observed not just him, but her own thoughts. He's under pressure. He's not attacking me, he's expressing his stress. I can stay grounded. Her response, calm, clear, and professional. And something surprising happened. The principal's behavior softened over time. Without someone to project onto his own defensiveness, collapsed. Jung saw this time and time again in his patients. Those who learned to access the reaction gap weren't just calmer, they were freer. They weren't being controlled by every emotional whim of others. They had reclaimed authorship over their own inner world. This led to one of Jung's most powerful insights. You are not your emotions. You are the awareness that experiences them. Emotions are information, not commands. And when you learn to observe them without becoming them, you step into a level of psychological freedom that most people never even imagine exists. Jung's research into emotional resilience continued to evolve. Beyond the shadow mirror and the reaction gap, he identified another cornerstone of emotional impermeability, what he referred to as the boundary fortress. This wasn't a wall built from indifference or emotional coldness. It was a psychological infrastructure designed to protect the inner self from being overrun by external chaos. Most people, Jung noted, live with completely porous boundaries. They absorb other people's stress, criticism, moods, and expectations. They allow the outside world to constantly dictate their inner emotional state. One negative comment can ruin their day. One rude gesture can spiral them into self-doubt. But those with emotional impermeability had constructed selective filters. They had the power to choose what entered their emotional space and what didn't. Heinrich explained it like this: "Doctor, I learned that other people can only disturb my peace if I give them permission. Their anger, their blame, their fear, these are their experiences, not mine. I don't have to carry what doesn't belong to me." Jung found that these psychological boundaries fell into three distinct categories. The relevance filter. Emotionally immune individuals only internalized feedback or input that was aligned with their growth or values. Everything else acknowledged, maybe even respected, but not absorbed. The ownership boundary. They could clearly separate their feelings from other people's feelings. If someone was angry at them, they recognized that as the other person's emotional state, not their responsibility. The identity fortress. Perhaps the most powerful boundary of all. These individuals had a stable sense of self that couldn't be shaken by external judgments. Criticism became data, not a verdict on their worth. But there was a downside to this power. Jung observed that the more impermeable people became, the more they seemed to attract emotionally unstable individuals. Why? Because people who lack internal stability often seek to regulate themselves through the emotional reactions of others. When someone like Heinrich refused to respond with anger, guilt, or drama, it unsettled the people around him. His calmness became provocative. "It's strange," Heinrich told Jung. "The more I remain calm, the more others try to provoke me. It's as if they need my reaction to justify their emotions, and my refusal to react makes them feel exposed." Jung found this phenomenon deeply revealing. Emotional reactivity is often a codependent system. One person throws the spark, the other catches fire. But when the fire doesn't start, when the cycle is broken, people are left to face their own inner discomfort. And that, for many, is terrifying. To help others build their own fortress, Jung developed the boundary protocol, made up of 3 active strategies. The emotional firewall. Before entering emotionally charged environments, decide ahead of time which emotions you'll allow in and which you'll simply observe without absorbing. The response selection. Prepare responses in advance for common triggers. This way, you're not reacting, you're executing a conscious decision. The identity anchor. Root your identity in unshakable values. When your sense of self is clear and internally defined, external opinions lose their grip. These techniques aren't about avoiding emotion. They're about choosing how and when you engage with it. As Jung discovered, emotional impermeability isn't a retreat from humanity. It's a deeper, more conscious engagement with it. Jung's continued investigation into emotional impermeability led him to yet another powerful psychological discovery, one he considered perhaps the most disturbing of all. He called it projection reversal, and it unveiled a simple but deeply unsettling truth. When people attack you, they're really revealing something about themselves, not you. Heinrich embodied this idea perfectly. In one particular session, he described being publicly criticized by a rival businessman who called him a heartless capitalist who cared nothing for his workers. Most people would have responded with outrage or defensiveness. But Heinrich, he felt curious. Dr. Heinrich said this man's insult told me everything about his own psychology and almost nothing about mine. His accusation of heartlessness reveals his own fear of being seen as cold. His focus on profits shows his anxiety around money. His concern for workers, likely guilt about how he treats his own staff. Jung realized Heinrich had developed what he came to call psychological X-ray vision, the ability to look through surface-level attacks and see the hidden pain or insecurity driving them. Once someone masters this ability, personal attacks lose their sting. Why? Because you stop taking them personally. Projection reversal is based on the idea that people unconsciously project their own fears, shame, or insecurities onto others. Criticisms become more about the critic than the target. Attacks on your appearance may stem from their own body image issues. Mockery of your ambitions may come from their unfulfilled potential. Condemnation of your choices often reflects their regret over roads not taken. To help people navigate projection, Jung developed a diagnostic tool consisting of 3 key questions. What quality is this person attacking in me? Where might they struggle with this same quality? What fear, pain, or insecurity could be driving this attack? Let's take an example, Lisa. A freelance designer was crushed when a new client told her that her portfolio looked amateurish and unprofessional. At first, she spiraled into self-doubt. But after applying projection reversal, she asked herself, what is he attacking my professionalism? Where might he struggle with this? She recalled him once mentioning how he felt like an outsider in the creative industry. What fear drives this attack? Perhaps a fear of being exposed as inadequate himself. With that lens, Lisa reframed the insult. It wasn't a judgment of her work. It was a mirror reflecting his insecurity. And just like that, the emotional weight lifted. But Jung also warned of a dark side to projection reversal. Once people become too skilled at seeing through others, they may start to feel detached, even alienated. Relationships become less about connection and more like observing wounded inner children masquerading as adults. Heinrich himself experienced this. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only adult in a room full of frightened children, he admitted. It's hard to take anything seriously when you see what's really going on beneath the surface. Jung understood the danger here. Emotional impermeability, if not tempered with compassion, can become emotional superiority. That's why the next evolution, emotional alchemy, became essential. Emotional alchemy, as Jung described it, is the highest evolution of emotional mastery. It goes beyond simply avoiding emotional reactions or seeing through projections. It's about transforming every emotional challenge into psychological growth. Rather than running from difficult people or triggers the emotionally immune, learn to seek them out as opportunities for self-evolution. Heinrich's insight into this process was profound. He told Jung, Dr. I no longer see difficult people as problems. I see them as teachers bringing me exactly the lessons I need to grow. The more someone can disturb my peace, the more value they hold for my development. This concept flipped traditional psychology on its head. While most people aim to reduce stress and avoid conflict, Heinrich leaned into discomfort, not masochistically, but as a conscious form of psychological training. He saw every confrontation, insult, or rejection as raw material for inner transformation. Jung called this phenomenon emotional alchemy, and he identified 3 key steps that emotionally immune individuals used to convert triggers into growth. Trigger mining. When disturbed, instead of reacting, they mined the experience for insights. They asked, what is this showing me about my blind spots, values, or needs? Shadow integration. They used the behavior of others to uncover suppressed or ignored parts of themselves, fears, insecurities, or desires. Strength synthesis. Finally, they used the insight to build strength, whether that meant better boundaries, deeper empathy, or greater confidence. Take the case of Marcus, a sales manager deeply frustrated by his underperforming team. Their excuses and laziness infuriated him. But instead of demanding harder work, Marcus used emotional alchemy. He asked himself, what is their laziness showing me? He realized he had a hidden belief that everyone should naturally share his drive. What weakness does this reveal his inability to inspire others without pressure? What strength can I develop? The ability to motivate through connection instead of criticism. So he shifted. He began having deeper one-on-one conversations, learning about each team member's goals and struggles. He studied motivational psychology, and slowly, his team transformed not just because of better management, but because Marcus had alchemized frustration into leadership growth. However, Jung warned that this level of emotional development had a potential downside. People who mastered emotional alchemy often became so focused on their own transformation that they began to lose patience with those who were still learning basic emotional regulation. This could lead to a sense of psychological superiority, a subtle arrogance that isolated them from meaningful connection. Heinrich admitted, Dr. I sometimes feel like I'm conducting a psychology experiment rather than living a human life. Every conversation becomes data, every reaction a pattern. It's hard to just be with people when you can see through all the noise. Jung recognized that the final stage of emotional mastery couldn't be detachment. It had to be something more human, more integrated. The goal wasn't to become cold and analytical. The goal was to become what Jung would later call the compassionate warrior, someone who can walk through fire and still remain warm. Jung's final and most profound insight into emotional impermeability was the concept of the compassionate warrior, an evolved psychological state that fused strength with empathy. The emotionally immune couldn't stop at simply resisting triggers or transforming them for personal growth. That level of mastery, while powerful, risked disconnection from others. The ultimate goal was to remain emotionally untouchable while still deeply connected to the emotional world of others. For Jung, emotional impermeability wasn't about escaping human emotion. It was about transcending reactivity while remaining fully engaged in humanity. The compassionate warrior is someone who can witness pain without absorbing it, offer support without becoming entangled, and hold space for others' emotions while remaining centered. Heinrich's transformation into this final stage didn't happen overnight. At first, his unshakable calm made people around him uncomfortable. His wife, friends, and colleagues saw his emotional composure not as strength, but as distance. But Jung helped him understand that true emotional immunity wasn't just about self-protection, it was about creating a safe space for others too. Dr. Heinrich reflected, I realize that my peace isn't complete if it only serves me. Real strength means letting others feel deeply in my presence without judgment, without needing to fix them, and still staying rooted in who I am. Jung watched as Heinrich began to practice this compassion in daily life. When his wife expressed anger or sadness, he didn't deflect or shut down. He listened fully present, attentive, but didn't absorb her emotional waves. When his employees came to him, stressed or overwhelmed, he didn't mirror their chaos. Instead, he became a grounding presence. Over time, people began to seek him out. Not because he gave advice, but because simply being around him calmed their nervous systems. Jung described this as emotional aikido, a kind of energetic redirection where instead of resisting others' emotions or absorbing them, you guide that energy into healing. When someone brings you anger, you redirect it into solutions. When someone brings you sorrow, you reflect compassion. When someone brings fear, you transmute it into clarity and calm. Heinrich became known not just for his composure, but for his ability to soothe others without losing himself. This was the paradox at the heart of Jung's work. True emotional power isn't about shutting emotions down, it's about letting them flow around you without knocking you off center. In his final notes on Heinrich, Jung wrote something extraordinary. He has learned to love others' humanity while remaining untouched by their chaos. This is the pinnacle of psychological strength, complete vulnerability, combined with complete invulnerability. The compassionate warrior doesn't retreat from human experience. Instead, they walk straight into the emotional storms of life and remain calm, connected, and clear. Jung's journey into the nature of emotional impermeability ultimately led him to a powerful conclusion. This wasn't a rare trait reserved for a select few. It was a psychological potential lying dormant in every human being. The transformation Heinrich underwent from triggered to reflective, from reactive to sovereign, from isolated to compassionate, wasn't supernatural. It was trainable, repeatable, and entirely human. What Jung discovered wasn't just a roadmap for becoming unbothered by others. It was a path to becoming fully free. He distilled this journey into 6 essential transformations. The shadow mirror, where triggers become reflections and reactions become self-awareness. The reaction gap, the space between emotion and response, where choice replaces habit. The boundary fortress, psychological barriers that filter what enters your inner world. Projection reversal, the ability to see others' attacks as revelations about them, not judgments of you. Emotional alchemy, using pain as fuel, turning emotional wounds into wisdom. The compassionate warrior, remaining unshaken while holding space for the emotions of others. Each step requires effort, honesty, and practice, but none require perfection. Jung believed that even beginning this work could radically change how you experience the world. As he famously wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And who you truly are is not your anger, not your wounds, not the reactions you inherited or the patterns you learned to survive. You are the one who watches. You are the one who chooses. You are the one who transforms. The question isn't whether emotional immunity is possible. Jung proved it was. The real question is, are you ready to claim it? Every time someone pushes your buttons, you have a choice. You can react, or you can awaken. You can take it personally, or you can take it as a mirror. You can be disturbed, or you can become untouchable. Your journey starts now. Every insult, every criticism, every difficult person is an invitation not to fight, but to understand. The only person who can disturb your peace is the part of you that hasn't been met with compassion yet. Embrace that part. Master yourself. And you'll find that no one, not even the most toxic person in the world, can take away your peace again. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's grow this journey together.